Hello and welcome to this week's Weekly Wind-Up with me, Helen Ashcroft. This week we're going to be looking at the Women's World Cup and how that can influence women's football at grassroots. And we're also going to be doing a roundup of the news items from around the region. The guest for this week's show is Kyle Warwick, who is a Weekly Wind-Up resident and a familiar face to everybody, I'm sure. So topic one. I'm sure we've all seen a lot of this topic in the news and elsewhere. Women's football has had such a huge rise in popularity in the last few years, and this means that a lot more games have been shown on TV. The BBC are currently showing the Women's World Cup. Let's hear what the people of Huddersfield have to say about this topic.
It's good because it's on TV, you get to watch more sport and it gets like the local young people involved.
I think it's brilliant. I think women should get more of a look in sport, especially the football, motor racing.
It's a really good thing to see, and I think it's long overdue. Needs to be more and more this kind of thing seen for people to get inspired by. A lot more investment needed, and it needs to happen on a more regular basis.
So Kyle, how do you feel about the rise in popularity of women's football?
I think it's only natural, really. Like the women's game has been growing massively for the last probably 20 years after it took a really big hit, really kind of. I know the women's game was massive in the 1920s when, during the First World War, there were obviously a lot of men off fighting abroad, and there was games in Britain that were attracting crowds of 55,000 people. In 1921, the FA banned women from playing on FA pitches, which essentially led to a ban on women's football in England, and that ban was only lifted in 1971. Since then, the women's game has been gradually rising and becoming more and more popular, and more women have been taking up the game. And I think we're getting to a stage now where it's kind of becoming far more people in the public are aware of women's football and the positives of women's football, the kind of subtle differences between the men's and women's game. So I think that rise in popularity is only natural, and I think it will only carry on getting bigger and bigger as you see more young women with role models that they can relate to in football.
So EA Games at the moment, are they thinking of changing what they're producing? Because up until now it's been the men's football, hasn't it, on their games?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, up until this year, I think this year FIFA 16 is going to be the first FIFA game to include women's football teams, which I believe it's around 11 international women's football teams that will be included in the franchise, which is a massive step forward again, and is certainly going to lead to another burst in popularity for women's football. And I think you're probably going to start seeing more, certainly young women and women going and watching women's football as opposed to men's football on the back of this, and more women taking up football. My niece has recently started playing football in Marsden, and I know she really loves it, and she's boundless energy, and it's really only the last couple of years that you've been seeing junior female football teams so prevalent around the region and around England, and there's a lot more funding. I think Sports England have said that they're going to invest £30 million in grassroots women's football, which is going to be massive. And I think it's only right, really, when you see certainly the popularity of women's football around Europe and the way that British football teams, you're seeing now where you've got Manchester City, Arsenal, Liverpool, big football teams in England that are taking up having women's football teams officially affiliated with their clubs. So that's it's all creating a situation that's pushing women's football in the right direction, really.
Now, it's interesting you've said that. Did you say it was your niece, sorry?
Yes.
Yes, my stepdaughter Amy, hi Amy, she's actually started playing football, but she lives over in Southport and they have football tournaments and they are all the girls. And she loves it, she absolutely loves it. But one thing I have to ask, in England, the men's footballers get paid an awful lot of money. How does that compare to the women's footballers?
The difference is astronomical. It's unbelievable, really. When you think that the highest paid England female football player is Steph Houghton, who her basic wage is £60,000 a year.
Right.
When you compare that to the highest paid men's player in the England football team, Wayne Rooney, £250,000 to £300,000 a week, it's completely insignificant.
Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with sponsorship.
Right.
And the popularity of the men's game. You've got lots of, the number of men's games during the regular season, you virtually can't escape football. It's always on somewhere. You've got BT Sport and you've got Sky Sports that, the package for the last round of TV rights was like £5-6 billion that went into men's football. Until you start seeing the kind of stadiums being filled in the same way that men's professional football is filling it, and the kind of, I think as well, sponsorship deals where you have the faces of female football being able to sell the same number of products that a male footballer will be able to. So you've got David Beckham's. The majority of the money that David Beckham made during his career was not from his wages, it was from the sponsorship deals that he received because his face was that well known. Yes. And I think you're only really starting to see certain female football players that are getting to anywhere near the level of recognisability that men's footballers have. I know certainly in America, Alex Morgan, who is paid £2 million a year.
I was going to ask you, is America above us then, obviously?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like in America, the situation is very different. It's almost seen as a starter sport for men in America. It'll be something that kids do at junior school and high school, but then when they get to, college years, American football, baseball, ice hockey, those are their main sports for men. It's seen a lot more as a women's sport in America, and you will get games that have, crowds of 15, 20,000 people. I know they were talking on the England game last night, there was a game in Canada that had 40,000 people at the stadium. So it's massive, and you have very well-known faces in American football. So Abby Wambach has been the main female footballer in America for the past probably 10 years really, and her notoriety has led to her getting very good sponsorship deals. Alex Morgan is seen as the next Abby Wambach, if you will. So she earns, I think it's £1.9 million out of the £2 million that she earns comes from sponsorship deals, which she has sponsorship deals with varying different companies. And I know there are products that would be seen as specific to men that male footballers make a lot of money off. So you're looking at your kind of Gillette razors that a lot of football players will use, and then Head and Shoulders for men. They are products advertised by male footballers. Alex Morgan has multiple deals with different companies, but there are female-specific products that eventually will become the realm of female footballers as they gain recognisability. And I think you're going to see that in England, certainly after the World Cup.
How long do you think?
I would say within the next sort of 4 or 5 years, maybe even shorter. I think a lot depends on how well England perform in the World Cup. They've been doing very well up to now. I've enjoyed a lot of the games that have been going on, but I think the further that England get into the tournament, the more it's going to get played out in the media, the more that people are going to start recognising those players. And I think there are extremely talented, extremely marketable women in the England's football team. So you might see with a good World Cup performance, you know, say the England women's team get to the quarterfinals or the semi-finals, touch wood, then you could see it after this World Cup. But I think more likely you're going to be seeing the women's game continue to rise. You're going to start seeing the number of spectators at women's football rising, and possibly as well, I think you're not far off seeing a television rights deal for women's football.
I was just going to ask you about that, because you say that you're watching it at the moment. What channel are you watching it on?
The BBC. I watch it on the BBC. I mean, the very, very good coverage, I must admit. It's not to the same extent as the Men's World Cup, where, you know, like the Men's World Cup, I watched every single game bar one, and you can't escape it really. It's on BBC One and done. Every game was on BBC One or BBC Two. Now it's kind of the England games. Last night's England game, which was a pivotal game for England in the World Cup, was shown on BBC Three, which is still a terrestrial channel, so that's great. The rest of the games tend to be being shown on BBC Red Button or BBC Sports website, which is still great because it's coverage beyond what has been shown before. There's never been a Women's World Cup where every single game has been shown in England before. So that is, it allows people the possibility to watch it, and that is only going to increase the recognisability of female footballers.
Thank you ever so much for those comments, Kyle. And now to some local news. The Huddersfield Examiner on the Monday, the 14th of June, reported a Dewsbury teenager being believed to be the youngest suicide bomber from the UK. Tala Asmal is thought to be the person who set off the car bomb in the northern Iraqi town of Barjeh on the 13th of June. The national media have reported that the man was named Abu Yusuf al-Brittany on the ISIS-related social media accounts and thought to be the alias of this Dewsbury teenager. So, Kyle, who do you feel the responsibility lies with when young people are able to make their way to join the groups like ISIS? And what can the local authority do to deter young people thinking of doing the same?
I think it's very difficult for people to apportion responsibility, really. I think certainly the majority of that responsibility lies with the person themselves. I think that can't be escaped. Obviously, there's a lot of online grooming of young, vulnerable people, and certainly there's a lot of things that need to be looked at, I would say. I think after things like this happen, it often hits the local community hardest, and it's kind of, and the family, and those people can be blamed, but often those people might be completely unaware that somebody that is getting involved in these kinds of things, it's almost it's similar, I would say, to kind of lone wolves in America, where you know they kind of regress into the internet, and that is when they're most vulnerable and they are taken advantage of. But I would say ultimately it's the young people. I would say there needs to be a lot more education locally about what these young people are actually going out to join. Certainly they can seem like, I imagine, causes worth fighting for to some people, but often it's the propaganda machine that makes it seem that way. And education, certainly from a very young age, I would say is key to certainly deterring and making it seem a less fruitful proposition for young people to go out and join groups like ISIS, because in the majority of cases these people are going out there and arriving in situations that are far, far worse than anything they could possibly imagine.
It's interesting you should say that. I've actually been on some training with regards to radicalisation that the authority are actually running. And it's the way that these messages are being put forward to the young people that are quite subliminal. And so the young people don't often see what's happening and the parents don't always see what's happening. Now, if that's the case, if these messages are coming through so discreetly into the young person's life, what can be done?
It's a good question. I think really I think it's that early stage education before somebody's even reached it. I know, speaking to people in the Muslim community, there is a degree of, you know, it's almost like people from outside of the Muslim community kind of blame Islam itself, which is kind of like, well, you can't do it, you know. I think it's one of those situations where I think at kind of infant and junior school level, there needs to be education on exactly what is the purpose of people being invited and encouraged to go and join groups like ISIS.
And do you think they target certain groups when they are wanting to do the recruiting?
I think that's only natural. I think it's almost like cult recruitment and recruitment to cults. You're going to find certain people in certain situations who are more receptive of the message that you're putting out there. And you know, there are people from white British backgrounds that have found themselves in that situation where they feel like, you know, they've converted to Islam and they've felt a need to go out and join it. And I think it's kind of a feeling disassociated from society in this country, and I think that is a big problem with the fact that there is a mass Islamophobia in British media, and it's not just a kind of British media doesn't portray it as they would with kind of white problems in white communities or Christian communities and things like that. It's portrayed as a problem with the entirety of Islam, and the problem with that is it only alienates all Muslims. It only alienates them from British society even more. And we hear this about, you know, Theresa May talking about British values and you know, we want to stop radicalisation and increase British values in people. And statements like that to me only alienate other communities within Britain more and more. I think Britain is a completely multicultural place now. You can't escape that. And we need to stop alienating other communities and portraying problems within communities that are relatively new to Britain and portraying them as problems with the entire community, because it just alienates more and more people to me.
Now, on the back of these reports, there's also been other reports saying Dewsbury is safe. Do you think that was a good idea to do that?
I think, you know, I saw a map of where the people who have died in fighting for ISIS and fighting in Syria for Islamic State, where they've come from geographically in Britain, and the circle over Dewsbury was surprisingly large for such a relatively small area in Britain. It was surprisingly large, and I think with that, you know, can come stigmatisation of that area. Yes. And that is another thing that is very dangerous to me. It leads to a situation where the Muslim community in Dewsbury start to feel more alienated from the rest of the community. So I think it is important. I just think it is important for people, and you see it with the way the Muslim community have come out from Dewsbury and said, you know, this is not what the Muslim community in Dewsbury is like. You can't label the Muslim community based on the actions of a small minority, and you can make it seem like that small minority is far bigger than it is. So I think it is important to stress that, you know, Dewsbury is not an unsafe place. It can be made to seem that way, exactly the same as you can make it seem like it's dangerous to walk through the centre of London for fear of stabbing. You know, it's sensationalisation really. So I think it is important to stress that Dewsbury is a community like any other.
And we also have to make it clear that radicalisation can happen across the board.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's, you know, you see that in massively in America with young white males. I mean, it happened recently. I mean, I think last night in Charleston in America, a young white male shooting 9 people dead in a African American church in Charleston, which is very sad. But you know, it is not a problem with the Muslim community. It is a problem with young people being disaffected and alienated from a society that they just don't feel part of anymore.
Right. Well, thank you ever so much for your comments on that, Kyle. Moving on to the next news item. This was in the Examiner on the 18th of June, and it's about Richard Branson's pitch to Rich, and Approved Foods have actually got through to the next stage, where they're going to face Sir Richard Branson. Now, this is Andy Needham and Dan Culdray of Approved Foods, and they're actually in the final. Business partners Andy Needham and Dan Culdray are a step closer to winning a share of the £1 million prize fund. Now, their company is Approved Food, and it's one of just 9 firms to reach the final stage of the nationwide Virgin Media Business Pitch to Rich competition. That's a bit of a mouthful. Andy lives at Skelmanthorpe, and Dan will pitch their business ideas to Richard Branson and a panel of expert judges during a live final on the 26th of June. Approved Foods, which sells surplus stocks, including food that is nearing or past its best before date, received more than 12,700 votes from the public. And as a result, they'll now go up against 2 other businesses in the grow of the competition and be in with a chance to win the share of the £1 million prize fund. So what are your opinions on that one, Kyle?
I think the business idea is great. I spent 2 years working in a supermarket, and one of my biggest bugbears working there was the amount of food we wasted, and the amount of good food that was perfectly good for human consumption that had to be taken off the shelves on its sell-by date and thrown away. And it horrified me. It was skip loads of food at times. And it was a case where even the staff weren't allowed to take that food away. And for me, there is no good reason that food should be wasted at all. There is no good reason. So a company like this, I think, is absolutely fantastic. I think the idea is brilliant.
I mean, we're talking about the best before dates, and you've just mentioned the sell-by dates. And I think it does get a bit confusing to consumers. So what does it actually mean, best before date?
You see, this is the thing. In America, they don't have best before dates. Right. I mean, and you'll find best before dates on things in Britain like vegetables, or, you know, I mean, canned goods and things like that. And it's nonsense. Nonsense, basically. It's a guideline. And what it allows supermarkets to do is turn around stock more. But in terms of, you know, a customer will buy an item, and because they don't know, the general population now, they're so out of touch with the food that they eat and the production methods, they don't understand the degradation of food, how it breaks down. So they will use the best before date as an absolute.
Legally in the UK, the food manufacturers are only obliged to have 2 date stamps on, either the use by or best before. So best before, you're right, we tend to find things that need to be eaten before that date. They can be eaten afterwards, and it might just change the taste or the texture, but they are safe to eat, aren't they? Yeah. So do you feel as though this, well, local company, big company with Richard Branson, do you think they're in with a chance?
I mean, I'd certainly, I would hope so, because it is something, not just from a locality kind of, but from an ethical side, I would hope that they are in with a chance, and certainly the fact that they've got through to the final. You know, you've got to be in it to win it, as they say.
Absolutely. Well, fingers crossed.
Indeed.
You may well be back reporting that they've won.
Absolutely.
In fact, they might even come on the show and tell us all about it.
Touch wood.
You never know. Thank you ever so much for that, Kyle. Right, okay, so join us after the break where we're going to be discussing, well, we've got two bits of things that we're going to be discussing. We're going to be discussing Huddersfield University and the fact that they're wanting to purchase an old building there, and also some robin chicks that have been born in a garden shed.
However large or small your business, attracting new customers requires dedication and a lot of patience. Just like fishing, but you also need the right gear. Rods,
reels, lines, hooks, sinkers, lures, tackle box, tackle bag, net, bait, gas gloves, clothes, pocket knife, wrench.
or you could simply advertise with KLTV. Online, grow your business and your clientele. KLTV, your vision made reality. Should have gone to KLTV.
Hello and welcome back. Let's have a look at some more news from in and around Kirklees. The Huddersfield Examiner on Friday the 12th of June reported that the university have put a bid in to use one of the oldest buildings in the town. Bosses at the university would like to convert the Sir John Ramsden court building, which actually overlooks the canal next to the university, and they're wanting to convert it into offices. Now, a statement submitted with the planning application says the revamp is part of the overall redevelopment of the university's Queensgate campus, and this follows on from the new sports centre and plans for the new build overlooking the Shorehead roundabout. The university, as I'm sure you will all know in Kirklees, has spent hundreds of millions of pounds on developing the campus. So here's the last news story for today, and this again was in the Huddersfield Examiner on the Tuesday the 16th of June. Where a Paddock family, this is a real feel-good story, Paddock family helped robins raise 6 chicks in their garden. Tyrone Brearley is to be a dad for the 3rd time, but while he waits for his partner Deanne Bedford to give birth, the Paddock man had another family to raise. He's supervising 6 robin chicks in his garden shed. The family of birds are so tame that Tyrone can walk into the shed and handle the week-old chicks without a problem. It's amazing, Mr. Brearley said. So what are your thoughts on this news story?
Well, it's great, and you know, I think he's certainly getting his practice in before his wife returns, isn't he? So fair play to him. Yeah, it's what it's going to be like when they fledge and leave the nest. I think he might be a bit teary-eyed when it does, when they do.
He has to get up in the middle of the night and do like night feeds and things.
Got a little baby monitor in the shed.
It is a really good feel-good story though,
Absolutely,
isn't it?
yeah.
And that's a brilliant story to end this week's Weekly Wind-Up with. Now, the Weekly Wind-Up can be contacted by email at info@kirkleeslocaltv.com, on Twitter at the @symbol, the Weekly Wind-Up, and also on Facebook. Thank you ever so much for watching. Have a good week.